Anyone who's a fan of the Legend of Zelda games knows of the Oracle titles. These two games, Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons, were released on the Game Boy Color back in 2001. Oracle of Ages had a large emphasis on puzzle solving, while Oracle of Seasons had a large emphasis on combat. Each game had a focus around one of the two goddesses from the lore of the Zelda universe. Ages' story focused on the goddess Nehru, and Seasons' story focused on the goddess Din. By linking the two games using a password system found in both titles, the third goddess, Furore, could be interacted with to unlock special items. Something you may not know is that there was a third Oracle game planned to be released. This third game was to have a plot with the focus on Furore, and have an emphasis on both puzzle solving and combat. Along with this, there was a theme of time with puzzles that could be solved by changing the time of the day due to limitations of the Game Boy Color and password link system, and with the Game Boy Advance to be released in the coming months, this elusive third game was inevitably cancelled. After both games were received overwhelmingly positive feedback, it was rumored that the third game was to be made for the Game Boy Advance. Although a new Zelda game was released years after the GBA came out, it wasn't the third game in the Oracle series. Despite this, a post was made on the V-board of 4chan back in 2008 that detailed information on the possible third Oracle game, which may not be true, but interesting nonetheless. The post shared some information and images which the anonymous user collected while working as a translator at Nintendo of America from 1998 to 2005. The poster claimed that he resigned from his position to pursue bigger and better possibilities, but still had some experiences from his job he wanted to share. He shared information about the development of the DS, a few of his experiences where he met Tatsumi Kimishima, Satoru Iwata, and a few other big names of Nintendo. But the most interesting thing the poster touched on was information about an unreleased Zelda game for the Game Boy Color. The post has long since fallen into the depths of dead threads, but a few people that saw the post took time to copy it down and save the images that were posted. Here's the portion that spoke of the unreleased Zelda game. A few of the games we worked on didn't come out. I don't remember a lot of them, but one I do remember, a cancelled Zelda game, because I actually got to play through a lot of it, and also because of bizarre content it contained. We received an early build beta of the game in 2002. We had to translate and record footage for a possible announcement later in the year. Although the game was still in beta, it seemed to be mostly finished, with the overworld, which was a sort of hybrid between areas of the overworld of the two Oracle games, and many of the dungeons were already finished. Most were just dungeons from the Oracle games, but with new areas and puzzles. The only thing it lacked was cutscenes and dialogue for major events. Anyways, it was pretty clear that this was a sequel to the Oracle games, and it turned out it was being developed by a small team of 8, and the beta we had received had been in production for about 5 months. Now, this wasn't surprising, as the game used assets mostly from the Oracle games and Link's Awakening. What was surprising was that the game was in production for the Game Boy Color, even though the Game Boy Advance had been out for a while already. Anyways, the translations went smoothly, and we didn't have much trouble. Then came the point where we had to record gameplay footage and screenshots. Now, with our deadline coming up soon, I took one for the team and decided to do a lot of this at home, on my own time. And I'm glad I did this, because now I have pictures that I secretly kept, that would have otherwise been deleted had I done the work in the office. Now, until this point, I hadn't really played the game for longer than a few minutes, so I don't know too much about it aside from what I translated and what my coworkers had told me about. So I was kind of excited to get my hands on it now. The game played identically to the Oracle titles, but it was much more difficult. As previously mentioned, the game lacked a lot of major cutscenes and dialogue, so figuring out what to do was difficult, and it required a lot of trial and error. Also, the dialogue from the NPCs in the game, which is much of what we had to translate, didn't help much. In fact, the NPCs weren't nearly as helpful as they'd be in most games. Standoffish almost. They'd say things like, "Go away," or "Don't bother me," or "I don't talk to outsiders like you." And a few NPCs actually were hostile. They were slightly different looking than the other NPCs and would show up mostly in towns. These NPCs, I'll call them bandits, as they, seem to be, would stand in corners and run towards Link when he came close to them. Getting hit by them would cause Link to lose a few rupees and health. These enemies became really troublesome and made villages just generally unsafe. Anyways, other than a few new additions, the game's dungeons and items were almost the same as the ones from the Oracle titles, but there were a few interesting new items that I can recall. There was an hourglass item you got as the first item after the sword and shield that would change the time of day in the overworld. The time of day would change the colors of the map, and NPCs and certain things on the map would react differently based on the time of day, and this could be used to get into dungeons. There was also 2 new outfits for Link, which I believe were light and dark costumes. The light outfit would allow Link to move quicker and light up dark rooms at the cost of not being able to use not able to, damage enemies with the sword. The dark outfit allowed Link to deal more damage, and swinging the sword would sometimes result in firing a beam without being at full health. But it came at the cost of being slower and taking more damage, I think. And for some reason, when equipped with a dark outfit, you could actually attack NPCs and temporarily kill them, until you leave the room and return. Sort of like destroying a sign. I'm not sure if this was a bug, but it was still sort of funny to be able to attack the NPCs for me. I guess now I should finally talk about some of the strange content from the game that I mentioned earlier. See, after beating 7 dungeons, I was able to access the final one, which was in a waterfall near one of the towns. The dungeon began with a big room and a descending staircase in the middle, with an NPC warning of no turning back, and typical final level stuff like that. This dungeon, though, stood out from the rest as it seemed to be completely unique and wasn't a copy of a previous dungeon. It also allowed the time of day to be changed, which wasn't allowed in any of the previous dungeons. They all had 9 floors, each of them were very odd for a game like Zelda. The first floor began with Link falling from above. The floor wasn't too odd, in fact, it was just a large white room with a bunch of unmoving NPCs that actually couldn't even be talked to, and no music, by the way. Probably an unfinished section if you think about it. The second floor is where the challenge started. The floor also didn't have any music, and was completely dark until the light outfit was equipped, or the time was set to day, which I didn't realize until I, just about finished the floor. Stupid past me. If I remember correctly, there was a sort of wind effect that would constantly push Link around, and really added to the challenge. But most notably was a new enemy which I can only assume was a Re-Dead. These enemies would chase after Link and grab hold of them to deal constant damage until they were shook off. They also really didn't die. They just left behind a corpse that would get up after some time, as they would in Ocarina of Time. This combined with the constant wind made the floor very annoying. Floor 3 was just a boss battle against what I guess was a Cerberus. It wasn't too hard, then came Floor 4, which took me about an hour to complete. The floor had no enemies and nothing but block puzzles, and I was never good at these, so I hated this part. Floor 5 was an area full of water, and because of this, the monsters in the water were impossible to kill, as Link had to be swimming constantly. The next floor was accessed by talking to an NPC on a boat. Floor 6 was quite different than the others that had music, but it was just a loop of a few short notes. It also began with a long hallway with a bunch of tombstones on the sides. Trying to examine these brought up the message, "You can hear screaming beneath the ground." Which was kind of eerie, as I don't remember translating it at all. Sure, someone else on my team may have, but even so, it was such an odd line. Things only got stranger from here. The end of the hall was a door that led to a fight with a Medusa head. Wasn't too hard, but after beating the boss, a message came up said, "All will join us someday." And then the screen faded and opened in Floor 7. A room with a door to the north. Going through the door led into the room with a lot of enemies, and I mean like too many enemies for the Game Boy to even handle. The game started lagging really hard, and this caused me to die due to the horde of enemies and extreme slowdown. Instead of starting at the beginning of the dungeon like usual, the game spawned me in a different location on the floor. It was in what I think was a pit of lava. I respawned with full health, but staying in the lava would drain it, so I swam out. The rest of the floor consisted of rooms with lots of weird-looking versions of enemies, not as many as the ones before, thank God, puzzles, and a few mini-bosses like one against Varin from Oracle of Ages in front of the Maku tree. Both looked different, very different. Eventually, I made it to Floor 8. The floor was just another long hallway, but it had some stuff happening to NPCs in the background. It was hard to tell, but I remember one NPC was just being whipped by a monster. One was upside down and on fire, apparently, and one was just running in circles. Other than the odd stuff happening to the NPCs, the music here was kind of creepy itself. It wasn't just a few notes like the other song, and was just a melody that sounded similar to the Forest Temple song from Ocarina of Time. Even though it was just a game, it made me a little creeped out as I was playing it alone in my office room. Kinda wimpy, I know. Then finally came Floor 9, this is where the final boss battle takes place. The first boss was against 2 dark nuts that seemed to have more health and did more damage. Killing them seemed to make the boss music slow down. Like the notes were more spaced out. The next boss was Rolf, the guy from Oracle of Ages. He was fast, strong, and quite difficult. I nearly died to him, but luckily I managed to beat him too. And once he was beaten, the music slowed down more and the notes became a bit off-key. The final battle was with Ganon. Nothing was different about him except for the loud buzzing noise he made every time he took damage. And the music was now just a jumble of random pitched noises. Beating him was harder than Rolf, and I had only one heart left by the end of the battle. Upon defeating him, the screen faded out and skipped to the credits, many of which were just crediting the people who created the assets from the previous games that were used in this one. The credits seemed to be still unfinished as it was, very simplistic and empty, and no music or sounds played. But once that was finished, I jumped as the final screen faded in, not really because of the picture, but rather the loud buzz that broke the silence when it faded in. The ending image seemed to be Furore with a strange-looking face on a red background, which seemed reminiscent of the Zelda 2 Game Over screen. The picture was odd, and I didn't think anything of it, because I was scrambling to turn down the volume as a loud buzz persisted. I assumed the game encountered an error once the credits ended, resulting in the buzz. Anyways, that was all that happened during the recording session, but the story doesn't end there. A little after translation and recording had completed, some higher-ups came in and took the game back, along with all the screenshots, and videos that were recorded. After all, nothing much really happened for a while. We didn't hear anything else about the game for a long time. And one day I brought it up around some coworkers, seemed a little bit surprised that I didn't know, and then told me that he had heard, what he had heard happen with the game after we had finished it. According to what he had heard from other workers, the game was indeed going to be the third game in the Zelda Oracle series, and once again, Capcom was in charge of making it. But in order to cut back on costs and train employees at the same time, Capcom had chosen a smaller team of new workers to create the game using assets from the previous Game Boy games. Once the team had started on the game, nobody found out anything about development of the game, not even the higher-ups at Nintendo. As it turns out, the team kept the game and their direction for it a secret. The first time anyone had heard anything of it since it began development was when we had received the beta version of the game, which was also brought to Nintendo of Japan to be shown to them. The team behind the game was called in later to discuss the game itself. The leader of the team, and I never found out his name, had wanted to take the game in a much darker direction. According to what I had heard, he wanted to create a world in a similar style to Majora's Mask, but take it even further with death and disease. The game was also planned to have a story driven by player choice, which was a rather bold design choice for the time. The story was about Link trying to find a cure to a disease that the Oracle Furore had contracted. In order to do this, he has to find healing fruits in different dungeons to make the cure. The cure is changed by the heart of whoever makes it, or something like that. So if the player makes bad decisions, the cure would cause Furore to become evil and destroy the world. Turns out the light and dark outfits I previously mentioned altered the ending. Killing NPCs with a dark outfit made it more likely to get this bad ending. And I did that kind of a lot. I'm a bad person, I know. But things got a little more bizarre after that. It turns out that in order to make the cure, Link has to sacrifice himself in the end to create it. And the final dungeon is based around the player's actions. These dungeons represented heaven and hell, and the dungeons I got was hell. Right after this was brought up, Nintendo decided to shut down the project because they clearly did not approve the direction the game was headed in. The leader of the team was furious. He told the higher-ups they didn't know anything, and that the game was perfect in every way, and insulted them until they took him out of the room. A few months after that, the man had sent threats and insults via phone call simultaneously, constantly even. Soon he started getting violent with the threats, claiming he'd walk into the office and shoot everyone down. Of course, the police were sent after him, and because of this, apparently he wasn't even living in the same place anymore. As far as anyone knew, he just disappeared and was out somewhere, sending threats to Nintendo from payphones because they wouldn't let him finish his game. Slip forward a few years later to about 2006, a while after I quit, I was on the phone with one of my old coworkers, who is still one of my close buddies. We were talking about how his work was going when he told me that the leader of the Zelda project from 2002 had supposedly shown up, or rather been outside the Nintendo of Japan Kyoto headquarters. Someone had recognized him and went out to talk to him, but once they had got out, he was gone. And nobody's sure why he's there. And apparently people have been seeing him inside of the building, observing the structure and employees, only for him to get away once somebody confronts him. One of the workers claimed that he had followed them home and killed their pet dog, which they found slashed up when they woke up in the morning. But the police couldn't do anything about it because nobody could confirm it was him. And even if they were able to, nobody even knew what he was saying. People think he's planning something, but nobody knows what. If anything, we'll just have to wait and see. Well, this is another Legend of Zelda creepypasta, and it's not the first time we've seen the Oracle games being used for creepy nightmare fuel. This was, however, the most interesting creepypasta on the subject that I have seen personally. Now, this is your typical hacked game with this Squidward Suicide-esque feel involving our translator buddy. Now, whether this is real or not, the fact is that a third Oracle game at Nintendo was in the works, but was cancelled, and in all honesty, whatever that project was, or whatever the game was, whatever's left of it, is at Nintendo, and that's about it. Would I have loved to see it? Of course. You know, who wouldn't want to see another Zelda game, and a unique original Zelda title? But we can't see it, alright? It's cancelled. Now, however, that does play very well into this creepypasta since they had a game in the works, and being somebody that works on the project, you'd expect to see some hot news behind the scenes. Now, I couldn't find the 4chan post that the creepypasta was addressing because, let's be honest, you can't find anything on there. But over here, it's believable because we have what appears to be someone who, again, works on the project. They work as a translator, a pretty important job for individuals working in an international company regarding, entertainment mediums, right? Whether it be film, whether it be television, whether it be books, whether it be video games, translators are used. Translators are very necessary when you're going from one region of the world to the other world, especially from Japan, to English or any other language thereof, right? And of course, this goes for anywhere else in the world as well. It's a very common job, and it's a job that, if you're very fluent in the language, you can get into it. It's very believable the way this creepypasta makes it out to be. Now again, that also couples the fact that because they worked on such a project, they do have experience, and everything here did make sense. The fact that they could take the game home out of the office is a little weird. Sometimes I don't think that's very common. I don't think you can take sensitive materials out of controlled areas. I mean, it just makes leaks that much easier. Now, the story came with screenshots, which you might have seen throughout the video, and although they were good, they seem to have just come out of an emulator or have been mocked up heavily, on Photoshop or something, but regardless, they are very good, and they had this sort of, Metroid feel. Remember that creepypasta we did where we had a ton of, the secret levels on Metroid 2? Now, the game itself, the creepypasta is discussing, seems very dark, and technically it all makes sense. It's not like this is breaking the Game Boy Color's, technical feasibility. It's a game that makes sense, and it is a very dark and interesting, tone that the Zelda series has taken a, grip on at that point. I would love to see this game. I mean, Majora's Mask, despite having its absurd time limit mechanic on an adventure game, was very charming to me because of the dark world that it portrayed, and I would have loved to see that happen more and more in other Zelda titles as time goes on. Now, of course, the ending was a tad bit weird. I mean, I understand being sour over somebody criticizing your work, not wanting to throw it out there, but, to send death threats and all that? What the fuck? It makes no sense. But at the end of the day, it does sort of have this cool sort of end to it. You don't know what this person's all about. You don't know where the person is, or the person could really exist. It just seems like at that point it also gets a little cringy because you're dealing with this, urban sort of legend at Nintendo. But other than that, throughout the whole story, I have to say this creepypasta was very cohesive. All of its acts played well together, and coupled with the screenshots, this was a very interesting and well done creepypasta. I was actually kind of intrigued. I was a little spooked at times, and personally, I think this is one of my, favorite creepypastas, and it's definitely an awesome way to kick off this year for creepypastas, and hopefully as time goes on, we'll see what else kicks more ass, and we'll see more awesome stories as time, proceeds. That being said, let me know what you think about it in the comments below. Tell me what you would change or add, and what you would rate this creepypasta. Let me know in the comments below. This has been another episode of Haunted Gaming, and if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. This is me, Mudahar, and I am out.